Hello, lovely people. It is I, Magnanix, once more, coming to you with another section of archived footage from the recent PB-chan modeling stream. I apologize for how late this one has been, but, amongst other things, I've generally been busy. So, without further ado, to keep this intro extremely short, let's begin with the interesting tidbits of Spartan history, based solely on the outfit you see in the background. Thanks will come at the end. History remembers the great warriors of Greece. History remembers the embellished tales of a fabled king. History remembers a culture for which common-day word usage still revolves around. We speak, of course, about Sparta and the Spartan society that existed within. History and any documentation from the period of Sparta's great rise and fall are few and far between. It is believed, and written in some sources, that the Spartans were forbidden from keeping historical documents. This does not make much sense, but then again, there are some cultures that still hold true to such Spartan teachings. All history and information that we have at our disposal right now never came from Spartans themselves. They were always recorded down in journals, mementos, and books written by scholars and dignitaries who were in Sparta during its powerful rise and fall. Of these treatises, some appear more fanciful than others, and paint an extremely harsh environment for all members of the Spartan culture. One thing that most texts agree on, though, is that the Spartans always believed themselves to be some form of higher power. Most histories involving the Spartan culture start from a central point. It is believed that Heracles came across the waters to the lands of southern Greece with two trusted adjutants. He then bequeathed the land upon them. These two became the first two kings of Sparta. Yes, you heard me right. Spartan culture had two kings. This is known as a diarchy. The way that it worked is there were two kings, and all of their male heirs would be the successors. The crown always passed to the male heir. There was no way for it to leave the two families. After all, they were appointed by Heracles himself. The two kings, though, were answerable to their people. It was not just a dictatorship by two kings. No. 5 individuals, known as the Ephors of the Ephorate, or Ephoret, depending on your pronunciation, were elected officials, essentially. Each of them served a single-year term, and once they had served once, could never serve again for the remainder of their lives. During this single-year term, these 5 individuals, along with the two kings, would lead Spartan society. Though there was another layer after that, but we'll get to that shortly. Along with becoming one of the people in this post, an Ephor, not only do you have the ability to propose new legislature and push it forward for ratification, the Ephors were always gazing over the kings and their actions. If one of the kings happened to make a mistake or show poor form, breaking one of the other societal rules within the Spartan culture, or generally just being a heinous individual, they were capable of charging even a king. As in a standard trial, evidence was given and a decision or a verdict was to be made. If 3 of the 5 agreed that the individual in question, the king, had broken said law or rule or made a general fool of themselves, such as that it would affect the Spartan culture in a negative way, then the king could be forced to pay recompense, whether this be through taxing, whether it be through general money, whether it be through sacrifices or other forms, even up to the point of having a king straight up executed. Many of the things that the F4s did all worked in this way, by simple majority. Say they wanted to raise or lower taxes, or force everyone that lived directly in the heart of the capital to give a succulent roast feast to the training ground once a year. If 3 of them agreed, then it would be pushed forward to the next stage, where it was presented to the people, and then finally to the Gerousia, before it was written into law for the Spartan culture. This post sounds like it would be incredibly powerful. The way that these 5 were selected is thought to be through a random process. People would elect the officials that they wished to take the positions, and then from the pool of all elected candidates, 5 were chosen at random. They would serve their year term and then leave. Now, one would think that during this year you could get up to a lot of no good. However, to balance this, what ended up happening was at the end of your year term, you would meet the new 5 F4s, and had to explain everything that you did to them. A sort of judgment. If during your term as an F4 you did a poor job of it, you were chargeable, the same way as the king earlier, through fine, taxing, or death. So, this led to the F4s always keeping the best interest of the people at mind, and obviously keeping everyone happy. It is thought that this might have been one of the reasons that Spartan culture suddenly died out, but it is not certain that we know any of this. It could have been the next set of people that caused that too. And that, my friends, is the Gerousia. A strange word, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. The Gerousia was a group of 30 people, all older wise men above the age of 60. The positions on this council were extremely coveted, for these people had the final say. These 30 men could veto any decision. They could put forth what things were discussed at the meetings of the Spartan councils. These 30 wise old men were the backbone of Spartan culture. They were the ones that judged and decided exactly where everything would go. These are the final doorstep. A civilization run by wise old men, with 2 kings and 5 people of a council to answer to. This was the way the political system all worked. It worked in concert for the most part, but due to the way it was structured, it is believed it was too inflexible. For if everyone is happy in the Gerousia, why would they allow any laws to pass that would do them a disservice? Thus the status quo is kept, and thus Spartan culture stagnates. Though that might not be the entire reason. Let's say you were born a Spartan. For the sake of entertainment, let's say you were born a Spartan male. At birth you were inspected. It is believed this might not be entirely true anymore, judging on historical documents, but let's go with the commonly believed practices. You would be inspected at birth by an old wise man, possibly of the Gerousia, possibly just a magistrate, maybe even one of the F4s. If you were deemed to be not viable, or had any deformities at all, you would be left at the base of Mount Taygetos, left for several days until you were either taken by exposure, or you survived when you were checked on, which would then allow you to continue living. Growing up in such a militaristic culture, it would be expected that many of the social norms would be picked up in your early formative years. At the age of 7, you would be taken from your family and enrolled in a training regimen known as the Argosier. This was a place where boys would be set apart, where they would all join a single mess hall and learn the skills they needed to be the ultimate warriors. Different texts report that different things were taught at these places. In one such situation, it was believed that reading, writing, and literature was taught to the males alongside their general athletic, dancing, and combat training. Most texts, however, do specify that one of the training methods that was used for these young boys was starvation. They were very underfed in Yagoje. This taught them not to fear the pains of hunger, not to be distracted by it when they are on the long march. In battle, they cannot be distracted by anything. Not only were they underfed, they were encouraged to steal for their own succor, and if they were caught, they were punished harshly, not for stealing. No, they were punished for getting caught. Among other brutality, there are records of different situations where the boys would be all stood up and flogged until only one stood. That boy was then praised for being a true man. Other texts describe strange rituals where the boys would pray to the gods of Spartan culture and be whipped brutally until they either died or were barely alive. Within the Yagoje, the different training methods that were used generally broke the ties between the boys and their families and made them serve Sparta wholly, Sparta first, and Sparta only. Much as was believed with Western knights in fantasy and history both, these young boys would form relationships with older soldiers who would then pass down their knowledge, skills, and teaching, as well as, recorded in some cases, more carnal teachings. Progressing through the Yagoje up to the age of 20, the majority of their life now spent training within this realm of soldiery. They would then leave the Yagoje, having either failed out through death or graduated. Upon their graduation, these boys, nay, men now, would serve in the Spartan military for 10 years, possibly even more, depending on where their life would take them from that point onwards. Interestingly enough, if we were to go all the way back to the beginning of this process, and say instead that you were born as a female, not much would actually differ here. The only difference would be the beatings and slaughter within the Yagoje. It is believed that the same eugenics processes were undertaken with the female children as well, as Spartan women were expected to bear good men. They were then taken also at a young age and put into a version of the Yagoje for themselves, where they would learn athleticism, dancing, reading, writing, and life skills that were generally the provision of men during this period of time. It is interesting that most accounts do say Spartan women were some of the most beautiful women in all the lands of Greece. Interesting that they say this, for Spartan women were possibly the only women in Greece that received a formal education and could understand the inner workings of the world. Rather than living within a dorm filled with other girls who are undergoing the training, each girl was left to live with their mother, who in turn taught the girls womanly wiles. It was all to the belief that Spartan women are the only women that could birth real men. And don't let that fool you. In some histories it is agreed upon that, should all else fail, the women of the Spartan culture would take up arms as a militia to defend their homeland, the homeland of Sparta, a land without walls. That reminds me of the laconic phrase. Let's get into that then. A term exists coined specifically for the way that Spartans would speak to their enemies and friends. It is called the laconic phrase. One key example is, as I said before, no walls, only men. But a very prominent example, one known by almost everyone when you speak of the history of Sparta, involves a brief interchange, rather heated at the time, between the Macedonian king Philip II during his invasion of southern Greece after he had received submission from other key city-states. He, Philip, turned his attention to Sparta and asked menacingly whether or not he should come as friend or foe. Sparta replied with a single word: neither. Losing his patience and frothing with rage, Philip II then sent a rather angrily worded letter, believed to be along the lines of, "You are advised to submit without further delay, for if I bring my army into your land, I will destroy your farms, slay your people, and raze your city." The Spartan ephors, again, replied with but a single word: if. The laconic phrase was not specific just to Sparta, and you can even see parts of it in different cultures nowadays, such as, something I'm very aware of, Australian humour. It is a very blunt and terse way of speaking. The other example that I had mentioned briefly before was attributed to a legendary lawgiver called Lycurgus. When asked whether it would be prudent to build a defensive wall enclosing the city, Lycurgus answered, "A city is well fortified which has a wall of men instead of brick." Not knowing if this next part is true, it is believed that when another Spartan was later shown an Asian city with impressive fortifications, he remarked, "Ha! Fine quarters for women!" Though we see the humour in these laconic phrases nowadays, back then it was seen as a form of dullness or slowness. Many people thought that the Spartans were not full in mind, witless, one would say. However, some historians believed, or rather people that lived at the times, such as Socrates in Plato's dialogue, rejected that idea and believed that simply using individual words in such key parts of conversation, and then suddenly dropping bombshells, such as the wall quote before, showed that each Spartan warrior actually held a veritable arsenal of wit and intelligence, philosophy and understanding. If you could break a conversation up with a single word, well, I would believe that you have some power over conversation as well. Though, again, this may just go back to their training in the Agoge. It is believed that a Spartan youth could be reportedly liable to have his thumb bitten as punishment for too verbose of a response to a teacher's question. So make of that what you will. And now we get to the beautiful part of this story, the one that everybody would believe I should have done only and nothing else. Bold Leonidas. Yes, the story of 300. I'm not going to poke holes in it because I like the story, even if part of it is mainly embellishment. An interesting thing, this story. It all began when Ionia, one of the city-states of the Persian Empire, rebelled, causing strife and threatening the very fabric and structure of the Persian Empire itself. These Ionian rebels were supported by various Greek city-states, such as Athens, ultimately forcing the ire of King Darius of Persia to gaze upon the lands of southern Greece. Using that as both an excuse and a reason to continue his conquest of the known world, he pushed forward into the lands of southern Greece, successfully quelling and subduing multiple different city-states within the Greek region, however, also making a terrible mistake. When landing at the Bay of Marathon, his vast army was met by a small contingent of Athenian knights in the bay. Surprising everyone, I'm sure, he lost utterly. A small group of Athenian knights was capable of overthrowing the entire Persian army. Battered and bruised, they fled, retreating from this lost battleground. However, as they say, the Athenians won the battle, but ultimately it is believed they lost the war, as much of the territory on the way to Athens was claimed by the Persian Empire. However, Darius did not leave it here, and had planned to finally take it back to Athens and claim the remainder of Greece, for at that time both Sparta and Athens were openly hostile against them, declaring them at war. Though to his own misfortune, he died of old age before he could launch his second assault on southern Greece, so it fell to his son, Xerxes, to take control of the Persian armies and continue the conquest in his father's name. And we all know how that battle went. One reason that it is unbelievable, based solely on the movie and graphic novel 300, is the way that the armored knights are dressed. However, if you put it all into perspective, 10 years prior, the entire Persian military was routed by a small contingent of Athenian knights. It is both interesting and utterly baffling that the Persian Empire would once more attack the Greek soldiery without doing any research whatsoever. If a small contingent of Athenian knights could overthrow their main armada originally, and then they would go to attack a full nation of these people, well, it doesn't make much sense, does it? But here's the thing. It seems the Persians simply did not do any research, for the Spartan soldiers and other soldiery that was there that held the hot gates during the Battle of Thermopylae were essentially, in modern-day terms, wearing full-body power armor. You see, the Spartans didn't wear beados with capes and a shield and a simple spear and a blade like they do in the movie. No, they wore full battle regalia. Full bronze plate with bronze-kilted skirts, bronze full helms, full-body bronze shields, and bronze spears and blades, whereas the people they were fighting in the Persian army were either unarmored, undisciplined, or at most wore wicker, which bronze spears have absolutely no issue piercing through. Another interesting thing that made the Spartans a force to be feared was that they had trained solely for Sparta. It is said that they were so in tune with each other that simply by listening to a marching flute they could walk into battle in perfect formation. They knew when to cover their brothers and lock into amazing formations that were generally not seen during war at that time. It is quite easy to see how, if given the time, the 300 soldiers, or more, would have been able to hold out at the hot gates almost indefinitely until the remainder of the Greek army arrived. The only reason that they lost in the end was due to the betrayal of a shepherd, a foul being known as Ephialtes of Trachis, who led the personal knights or guards of the Persian leader Xerxes up a hidden goat path to flank the Spartans. In the end, the majority of soldiery that were with the Spartans in the Battle of Thermopylae retreated. Meanwhile, holding back the enemy for that final retreat, the Spartans and those glorious few remained, stalwart defenders, steadfast in their destruction of the enemy. And because of their sacrifice, because of their martyrdom, the entirety of Greece fell into an uproar. And that, my friends, is the story of the Spartans. So where are they now? Interestingly enough, no history or information can show why the Spartans declined. Suddenly their whole culture fell. It may be because they were so paranoid, it may be because of legislature that was poorly passed, or it may be because they stagnated and died, whether through loss of wealth or other means. All that is known is that their grand culture went from a massive amount of people down to a trickling 1,000 or so by the time the next invading army came by, merely laughing at their strange animal-like behavior. You might say one of their fall-downs is that they only trained infantry, not light infantry or heavy cavalry. You only had the Spartan soldiers. But if you want to know more about this, there are many sources online that you can look into. I do truly implore you, look it all up. It's quite interesting reading up about the Spartan culture, and there are inaccuracies all over the internet, so my whole description here, though as fanciful and interesting as I could make it sound, may have inaccuracies within it. Whilst I was researching all of this information on the Spartan culture and the way that they were raised, something interesting happened. Well, it didn't happen, but I noticed some similarities between the Spartan culture and upbringing and a book that I had read a few years ago. The book was called The Warded Man, and within it describes a warlike culture who specifically always braved the night to fight demons, but they were also pushed through harsh conditions as youths. They called it the Hanupash, and it sounds very similar to the Agoge. though it might not be based solely on Spartan society, as I do believe there are many other cultures to take this inspiration from. It made me feel nostalgic, and I'll be giving that book another read. And this is the part where I shill myself out and say go and sign up for Audible. But I'm not going to. Instead, what I'm going to do is thank you, you lovely individual, for sticking with the video all the way to the end. But did you? Well, it's your prerogative either way. I would also, as normal, like to thank all of my Twitch subscribers and, finally, my patrons. You wonderful people make all that I do so much nicer. Just knowing that I am bringing you valued enjoyment brings a smile to my face every time. I've spun a wheel and it landed on 00039, so their thank you will be a little different this time. But I wish to thank each and every one of you. So thank you. Arcane, Curious Cryptogenic, Evan Fang, Flying Ostrich, Flying Bear, Homebrewed Dwarf, It's a Doodle, Jinrai, Krez Kauka, Kai Kotsu, Lil Bagel, Lolly Goddess, Mashiro Sora, Obi-Wana no Mi, Soul Flayer, Wakuzo, and your pal Jinx. And now, thanks to you, 39, let's ad-lib something. The world was darkness, but then suddenly a trickle of light, a simple drop in the lake of absolute nothingness, a fracture on the world, then an explosion. As the hero 00039 arrived, the world brightened, and the dawn of a new day was seen on the horizon for the first time in millennia. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, or night, no matter where you are. Farewell for now.